The reason you're going to sidechain majority of the time in your music will be to make way for your kick. Now, usually it would be in relation to your bass and some of your top elements, not allowing the kick to shine in its utmost glory and pop through enough, okay? Now, each sidechain will be a little bit different. So right now we're going to focus more on the bass sidechain now. When you have the kick, you have a lot of low-end information. When you have the bass, you have a lot of low-end information as well. And the problem with this is when you have a lot of low-end information, the same frequencies being taken up by the kick and the bass, then you run the risk of phase cancellation, which is where the sounds cancel out. Now, at louder volumes, it becomes more apparent versus at quieter volumes. While it's still there, it might not be as noticeable. When you have your bass going through its cycles and you have your kick going through its cycles, you can see that the waveforms are either going up or either going down. So at some places, the bass might line up with the kick, but at other places, you might get total opposites, like here and here. And again, phase cancellation will occur with the low end is not the cleanest. So one way to solve this is to try and align the bass to the kick as best as you can. And while this is possible, a lot of the times it's not if your bass is moving a lot and your kick is also not in a static key. So a lot of 909 kicks, more tech housey kicks, they're going to have a pitch that doesn't stabilize too well, and you're not going to be able to, again, line it up in phase. So the next tool you have, the most popular tool, will be the sidechain, which is in essence, you're just moving the bass out of the way of the kick. So that way, whenever the kick plays, the bass moves out of the way. Now, as stated before, phase cancellation becomes more apparent when volumes are really loud. So theoretically, you could get away with having more of a sidechain like this. You solve the problem somewhat. Like, it's still going to be there. It's just not going to be as apparent and as detrimental. So ways to solve this now are going to be your volume automation and also frequency manipulation. So the first step you have is to use your stock Ableton compressor. You're going to pretty much click your arrow. You're going to click sidechain. You're going to route your kick in. And from there, if you find it's too quiet, you can use the gain here to increase the volume of the kick as it comes in to give you more leeway, more space. And you're going to pull down. And as you pull down, the volume of the bass will start getting reduced when the kick hits. So, with it off, bass is going. With it down, bass is getting reduced when the kick hits. Now, the problem with this compressor, as you can see, is that you never really get rid of the sound. So, you always have some form of phase cancellation occurring as long as both signals are present at the same time. It's just not as apparent. So you could definitely get away with that. Now, a couple of tricks here, if you like this method, is first off, you can use your EQ here in order to look at a certain part of the kick. So you can EQ out all the low end of the kick before it reaches a compressor. So that way you have more of a transient to look at and have the compressor react to. And then you can use your release to control the duck that is occurring, the volume reducement. The other thing is you can look more at the low end as well and create more of an intense sidechain. So these are useful features. Finally, a lot of people like to have a transient that comes in a little earlier in order to trigger the sidechain. They find it helps with the clicks and stuff. So if you find that's something you want to do, what I recommend you do actually is go here, click, and then turn on your look ahead. This look ahead gives the compressor a few milliseconds head start, which means it's just delaying Ableton. You know, the compressor's not going back to the future and then coming back, or else, you know, where's that machine at? But you're giving the compressor time to react to the kick, leading to a smoother transient or smoother sidechain. Or you can leave it at 0 if you want more of an intense sidechain. My favorite method of sidechaining a bass is to use Kickstart, which is a tool, fairly inexpensive, that allows us to first off see the kick coming in. So we route the kick in, and then allow us to use that as a guide to sidechain the bass as best as we can. But the important thing for me is, remember, the reason that bass and the kick fight is due to all the low end energy they both have. So what I like to do is remove the low end and allow the top through by hitting this band feature, which makes it so that everything below this frequency is sidechained and everything above isn't. So now we have the top elements of the bass passing through while the low part is getting sidechained. The other part of that, the kick's gonna fight with the bass, which is not as sensitive and as detrimental, is the transient of the kick. So as you can see when I do that, okay, the kick's definitely sounding better, but now the top part of the bass isn't allowing the kick to really feel oomph. You're not feeling the transient. So we can use another kickstart. This one, we're just gonna be more strict on, I want it to sidechain at the beginning where the kick is at, the transient of the kick, and I can lower this and allow the click through and its glory. Now, when it comes to sidechaining, we can look at it from the mixing point of view, but what about creative, right? So as you see here, this isn't really tickling my fancy. So I can sidechain further. I don't have to go all the way down because we already solved the low end issue, but I can allow some of that bass through, but I still want the pump effect. And that pump effect is what you also get with a sidechain. And you can definitely see it more as a effect rather than as a mixing tool in order to dial in the bass more. Now, similar to the top part of the bass, let's say you have a vocal that's playing, and let's say the vocal is sitting down the center of the mix. So the center of the mix sounds like this versus the sides is here. So this vocal will be sitting on top of the kick. Now, there's nothing going on here. You could definitely argue that there might be some masking occurring to the transient of the kick when the vocal is present. And if that's the case, then you're going to sidechain your vocal to the kick as well. Now, here's the important part. You don't need to sidechain like you did with the bass where you're strict and just removing the vocal completely unless you like the effect. But what you can do is you can definitely make way for the transient. So every time the transient hits, the vocal just ducks slightly. Just going to 50% over going to 100. Now, if you want to use the Ableton compressor here, then that's where that really cool trick we talked about comes into play, because what I can do is I can sidechain to the kick. And since I'm only trying to make way for that transient, not the low end, because the vocal doesn't have low end energy like that, then I can have this frequency, look more at the click, increase the gain, set this to peak. So it looks at the dark green meter over the bright green, which is the RMS, and just bring this down slight, like so. And it will sidechain, reduce the volume of the vocal for that second. Now I can also use my look ahead if I feel it's needed and I want it to sound smoother. And there we go. Now the same sidechain, let's say you like it and you want to add it to synth elements in the song, well, you can also do that. If you find that the chords or anything melodic is swamping the transient of the kick. Now, if something is wide like this, then you can argue that you don't really need to do it. But again, it doesn't hurt, especially in these values. Another way to sidechain is going to be to use plugins like Track Spacer, which sidechain based on frequency. And in this scenario, we can use it on an important element like the vocal in order to remove or lower the volume of the pad at certain frequencies and in certain parts of our stereo image in order to get a more cohesive, dialed in mix. For example, here, we have a pad playing with the vocal. And in the mid signal, if I overdo it, you can see that the vocal fights with the pad. The pad essentially covers the vocal, but there's always that tension there. And as a producer, you have to decide whether it's okay to have it like this. And if not, you have a couple of tools. One, you can use mid-side EQ, where you separate the side pad of the pad and the mid, and target where the collision is occurring, which in this instance is here in the mid center. So I can reduce like this and make it up on the sides in order to not lose the pad. My other option is to use sidechain with track spacer. And the way I would target this is, again, I would route in the vocal. I would go into advanced, change from left and right to mid side, but down to mid only. The center of the signal, because remember the pad has a side and mid signal. And then play it and increase my ratio. If I overdo it, you can see that the sides of the pad are still there. So now I'll dial that in. And this is a way for me to keep the vocal up front without anything under it or over it. Now let's talk about unique ways to sidechain, because I've seen it all and it's crazy to me how people do this. For instance, Sooth is a very popular, expensive plugin that many people use, and I've seen people actually run the kick into it. Turn the sidechain on, target the low end region, and this way you're focusing more on the low end part of the kick, and the bass is getting sidechain on that low end region. Can make it. I've also seen some very well respected mix engineers use kickstart where they'll route the kick in and use this, go in, play with the attack and the release. And target more of the low end region like so. They're all meant to solve the issue of something getting masked, which again, traditionally 100% of the time will be the kick bass. And in some situations, your vocal and lead elements with your pads and so forth. So in review, traditionally, we would sidechain the bass to the kick in order to solve the issue of phase cancellation occurring. Also, a lot of people like the pump effect that it gives. So if you like that and you want to put it on your synths, on some of your drums, then by all means do it. That's going to be more of an effect rather than the mixing technique to solve the issue, because you just want the pumping effect. From there, as the years have gone by, new mixing techniques and new technology have allowed producers to use things like Sooth 2 and track spacer in order to move the bass out of the way of the kick when it comes to just the low end region. And of course, if you have a vocal and a melodic element and you have a lot of pads or like a buildup that might be drowning out the vocal, then you can also use track spacer or multi-band ducking like Sooth, spectral ducking, in order to make way for the vocal. If you guys enjoyed this video and enjoyed some of the sounds you heard, consider checking out EvoSounds.com, where you can find all of my sound design work. And with that being said, if you've ever wondered about the low end, the sub, make sure to check out this video here and improve in your music production techniques.